And welcome to another edition of South Texas Now. This is attorney and nurse practitioner Joe Flores, reminding you to join us each and every week. With me today is former federal magistrate and law professor here in Texas, Brian Owsley. Good morning, Brian. How are you?
Morning. I'm doing well. Always good to see you, Joe.
It looks like you're busy. Yeah. I mean, you got a lot going on.
Busy or just have a messy office? A little bit of both.
I join you on that. And all our children are heading off to college, or are they already there? So I
My
understand.
daughter's finishing up her first year right now, so hopefully it goes well.
Well, that sounds
You know how
great.
that goes.
Uh, and that's one of the purposes that I was calling today. I wanted to get your take on what's going on around campuses from Columbia to NYU to UCLA, down to University of Texas. And can you tell us a little bit about your take on assembly and how the police are handling it, the politicians are handling it, and I've got a lot of upset parents too that have called in and said, I'm paying 90,000 a year for somebody, that I love to go to college, and things are being denied, ceremonies are being canceled, things like that. So, what's your take on it?
I doubt there are too many people paying $90,000 a year, but uh,
Columbia, yeah, yeah.
Columbia, but even then, people are getting some breaks typically. I know, my daughter's is pretty expensive. It's not 90, but it's in that neighborhood. But fortunately, I get a break because as a professor, I don't make any money, so they can't charge me full freight. But to get to the heart of the matter, I mean, like, there's you threw out a lot of different issues. So, but I mean, so let's keep in mind first thing I tell my First Amendment students is you got to have state action, right, for the First Amendment to apply. So when we're talking about Columbia or places like that, the Ivy Leagues, other private institutions, First Amendment doesn't apply to them as a matter of the Constitution. Now, our friends up in Austin, right, or other state schools, First Amendment applies to them, right? And that means a couple of things. Now, let's be clear, though. When I say First Amendment doesn't apply to Columbia, First Amendment applies to the NYPD, right? And so they're brought in to make whatever arrests, and that's one thing. But there's also some complaints about treatment of journalists, right, and preventing them from reporting, and that can be a problem with the First Amendment. We saw in Austin, a reporter was arrested and jailed overnight, allegedly for hitting, I think, an officer with camera. As I understand it, the reporter's version is, look, it was a melee. People were getting pushed all around, and stuff like that. And it sounds like there's some, in this day and age, there's always some video, and so that'll get sorted out. But when we saw what happened last week in Texas and Austin, I think they arrested over 57 people,
That's correct.
and then they dismissed all those charges because they didn't have a basis for arresting them. I mean, let's keep in mind. So they were arresting a lot of students who had the right to be on campus, right? They were upset that students were on sidewalks. Sidewalks are a public forum. At the end of the day, that's problematic. And so, I think, the police arrested him probably at the request of the president of the University of Texas, and with input seemingly from Texas state politicians, including up to the governor. And but the prosecutor looked at it and said, we can't go forward with this. and stuff like that. So it got dismissed there. Um, Even in, let's go back to my starting point of Columbia and Ivy League institutions, private schools, which would be any private schools in Texas as well. Like if things are going on at St. Mary's or Trinity, some of our fine private schools in the state, they're not bound by the First Amendment, but these are all universities. These are places where ideas are supposed to be exchanged and discussed. It seems to me from what I've seen and talked to people, there's some stuff by students that's inappropriate, right? I mean, like there's just some nasty rhetoric out there, and there may be some bullying or harassment, right? And so that's one thing. But punishing students because they take a stance on a political issue that some people don't like, that's a problem. That's a problem whether it's at a state institution where the First Amendment applies. It's a problem at a private institution where we're supposed to be teaching them to think and learn and exchange ideas.
Well, let's go back right after 9/11. There was an anti, Arab world sentiment. Anti-Iranian sentiment has always been there. And now we're seeing the language and the narrative is more that there's anti-Semitism, but we're not hearing too much about the other way around of anti-Palestinian deal. And I hear from people saying, well, look, they started it, just to simplify matters, and said, they used everything from, flying in over the wall. They did some heinous acts. And the argument back there is, well, the reaction was overreactionary. 30,000 plus people have been killed in the Gaza Strip. Buildings decimated, services have been denied. There's a food shortage, water, electricity. What's your take on that as far as the media or just politicians in general? Because we have such a close ties with Israel.
So let's be clear. What happened on October 7th was terrorism, plain and simple, just like what happened on September 11th was plain and simple, right? I mean, it's understandable for a strong Israeli response against Hamas. The problem is it seems to be some people here and seemingly over in Israel maybe are equating Palestinians with Hamas, right? Hamas is a terrorist organization, and they are responsible for a terrorist attack on October 7th that was horrific. But at the same time, you don't get to kill everybody because you're upset about that. I mean, something had to be done. And the thing is, this is a very complex problem. We didn't get here overnight. We've been dealing with this since at least 1948, and really probably even before that, right? And so it's not easily solved, right? I mean, one of the interesting things that I think about, and there's a lot of rhetoric going back and forth. Some people are upset when people chant from the river to the sea, saying that's basically an advocation for the destruction of Israel, or an advocation for killing all Israelis. I don't know. I mean, when you talk to some people, it's not as clear as that's what that means to them. But we have that. We have people who feel that basically Gaza has to be wiped out, but you can't wipe out Gaza. You can't wipe out 2.2 million people. There are some people who are arguing that the Israelis are committing genocide. I mean, genocide is a pretty tough standard to meet. So, Yeah. Are there some people out there who have the requisite intent to destroy a group of people, in this case, the Palestinians, based on their ethnic origin? It's possible, but I don't know that we've seen that fully. Now, let's be clear, though. There are other people who are saying that what's going on in Gaza involves war crimes. Again, these aren't, easy things to establish, but that may be more feasible. I mean, to the extent that you can show part of what's going on is use of food as a weapon, right? And things like that. That is possibly a war crime. Again, these are, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. It's a very complex matter, right? And it's going to take reasonable people to solve this. I think the interesting thing, going back to the campuses, you and I are, old enough to remember when there were apartheid protests on campus. That was sort of the big thing in our generation, right? And so, you know, it'll be interesting. Apartheid, I think, was an easier call. I mean, there weren't too many people who were standing up in support of apartheid or the South African regime at that time, right? It's a different thing to, hear, because I think a lot of reasonable people who care about Palestinian folks and would like to see a resolution to the conflict in the Middle East also acknowledge the right of Israel to exist, right? And so, and that, so it's a little bit more complex. But I'll be interested to see in August. We're at the end of the semester, we're at the end of the school year. I'll be interested to see if there's still fervor by the students. In other words, does this become a cause for this generation? Are people now so aware of the problems for Palestinians in both Gaza and the West Bank that they will continue to raise this cause and protest? And we have a history of protest, not just apartheid, but civil rights and Vietnam, and going back to the response. I mean, like, there's protests all over the country, but we're hearing about a handful where I think the administration took a hard tack and bungled it, right? I mean, again, these are teaching moments. As a professor, I view these as teaching moments, and I view university administrators who brought in, force as the solution as missing out on teaching moments, right? I mean, this should be a chance for dialogue, for discussion, where we can exchange ideas, learn, and grow. That's the whole reason that you and I send our kids to campuses to learn. And this is a learning moment that I think on some campuses is being squandered with, sort of high-handed tactics, using law enforcement in a way that's not necessary. By and large, these kids are just protesting. Even the tents. What is it about the tents that is sort of like now sort of like become this sort of point where, well, if there's a tent, we're sending in the police and we're going to tear it down and we're arresting you all? I mean, that makes no sense. You want to diffuse this? Let them just protest a little bit, right? Let them have their space. I went to Columbia. I know where they are. It's right there in the middle, on the grounds, and stuff like that. Similarly at UT. I mean, like, these are areas that are sort of the common areas. Let them have a little space. They can protest, as long as they're not harassing other students, as long as they're not physically or threatening or verbally threatening other students. Let them have their say. Let them have their space and go forward. And it either just dies out because this is like when we were, when our kids were little. Sometimes the best recourse was just to ignore them. And then they would get tired and they would realize that, throwing a temper tantrum wasn't getting what they wanted. And so they think about another way, right? And here, let these students sort of have their protest. Maybe they burn themselves out. Maybe they're committed enough that they continue with it, and then you have to reassess. Maybe they have their valid points as well. I mean, at the end of the day, this is about money. I mean, a place like Columbia or UT, they don't want to adversely impact their donor sources, regardless of what the students say or want.
Very good point. The other two things that I wanted to cover rather quickly were, okay, we heard that there was a gun by an officer that accidentally reportedly went off. Nobody was hurt. I think it was shot into the ground or a wall or something, and they're investigating that. Flash grenades were used in some instances where people were occupying a hall. I thought that was an overreach, but on the other hand, Brown University has said, as you said, they might run out of steam, and they said we're going to have a meeting in the fall. NPR reported, that Brown University, the powers that be said we're going to hash it out in the fall. Well, a lot of things can happen between now and then, and I don't know if this is just going to go away. And I don't have. There's no easy answer.
Well, and Brown University, I think, is an example. Again, another Ivy League institution. They're not bound by the First Amendment per se, but they are higher ed. They believe in the exchange of ideas. And here's one where they talked with the students and they negotiated a resolution in the sense that the students want divestment. That may or may not happen at Brown University. But what the students got is they're getting this discussion, and they will get a vote by the board of trustees or the type of entity by Brown. Maybe they'll be disappointed with the outcome. Maybe they'll get something out of the outcome. Maybe they'll start protesting again. But I mean, here, Brown University, instead of ratcheting it up and sending in all kinds of officers, threats of National Guard, horses, mounted police, whatever, flash grenades, armed officers, they diffused it by saying, let's meet and talk about this. I mean, that seems to be a reasonable way to handle these things, and I think a number of universities that we're seeing sort of in the press now missed that chance, and they ratcheted it up with a sort of militaristic approach to this. And I mean, what do we want? What are we going to get? Another Kent State, right? I mean,
that was exactly what I was thinking. Another Kent State. That's what I fear.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, you mentioned that for those that aren't indoctrinated into the law, you said some universities are affected by the First Amendment, some aren't. And can you expound upon that a little bit?
Yeah. So essentially, the First Amendment, all of the Constitution, only applies to the government. So in other words, let's say you have a Facebook account, and Facebook stops you from saying stuff. They boot you off or whatever. They can do that because that's theirs. It's a private company. Now, if the government comes in and prevents you from saying something, that's a First Amendment issue. And so when we talk about Columbia University or Brown University, right, those are private universities. They are like a Facebook, right? Whereas when we talk about the University of Texas, or here we have the University of North Texas, right? Dallas, that system, or we've had some protests and arrests at University of Texas at Dallas up here. I mean, those are all state institutions. What's going on at UCLA out in California, another state institution, right? And so a state institution is a governmental entity, and therefore the First Amendment and all of the Constitution applies to it in a way that it doesn't apply to the Columbias and the Yales and the Browns of the world.
The other thing that real quick, I know you're out of time and you've got to rush off, but you know, are we looking at federal offenses, state offenses, a mixture? Uh, you know, that's kind of hard for me to call. I was trying to look at the tea leaves there and
So,
saying, would it be state, federal? Would this affect the rest of their lives? Like, you know, it was applauded back in the Vietnam
yeah.
War as we look back, like, oh, you're a protester, you can have this job, you know, you're believing in your beliefs. I don't know if it applies so much now.
Yeah, I mean that's hard to tell, and it varies probably person to person. In terms of offenses, what have been charged essentially are state crimes, typically some kind of trespass, right? Charge. You know, these are not federal grounds. These universities, whether they're state or private, so unlikely that they're going to be federal charges unless there's something where, you know, maybe there's a conspiracy. You know, this is getting, you know, one, a little bit out there, but two, you have to have, you know, some kind of interstate commerce. So maybe they're using the mails or the wire in order furtherance of some criminal activity. I could see there potentially an argument for federal criminal violations, but so far it appears to be the lion's share of these are trespass, right? Which is sort of a state common law offense. It's not federal property, so it's not a federal crime. But we'll see.
And lastly, I want to thank you for taking the time to come on. Hopefully, you know, as this develops, we can bring you on again. And I hope that your kids are safe.
They are. I hope my daughter's studying for finals is what I hope.
Yes,
But I'm
yes.
sure she is. I'm sure I know she is. She's about to finish her first year, and I'm so proud of her. So I'm and I know that you're proud of your daughter as well.
Yeah, she's taking an Arabic final on Monday. The irony, right? You know, I
Yeah,
said, well, at least you'll expand your horizons. So
yeah. Did that.
yeah, but I want to thank you again, and that was you've been listening to former federal magistrate and law professor at University of North Texas, Brian Owsley. Thank you so much for coming on. I know we're running a little bit late, and I know you're busy, but thank you again for your legal insight.
Always a pleasure. Look forward to chatting again soon.
Thank you.